As part of my big project to establish my reasons to believe that Matthew was written in Hebrew, I investigated the traditional authorship and dates of the Gospels. At the time that I added that to the outline, I was still tacitly a Matthean priorist. By the time I started writing that section, I had switched, and I was tacitly a Markan priorist. Now I'm pretty firmly a Markan priorist. When I originally outlined my defense of Hebrew Matthew, I planned on presenting a robust defense of the traditional dates and authorship for the Gospels as a part of my defense of Hebrew Matthew. That was somewhat sidelined by altering my view of the order that the Gospels were written. It took me a while to, for lack of a better word, recover from the discovery that the early church was probably wrong about the order the Gospels were written. Many Markan priorists that want to maintain the authority of the early church will be quick to point out that the early church was far from unanimous about the order that the Gospels were written. Clement of Alexandria says that Matthew and Luke were written first, and that Papias describes the authorship of Mark before Matthew. However, the number of quotes that suggest an order of authorship for the Gospels other than the order they are printed in most modern Bibles is small enough that most of us could use our fingers to count them. So if the majority of church fathers were wrong about the order that the Gospels were written in, what else might they have gotten wrong? To address this, I think that it's worth remembering that there's not really anything special about the church fathers. They are just ancient people, like any other group of ancient people. They are just as likely to make the same kinds of errors as any other group of ancient historians or philosophers. So what do other ancient historians get wrong? For this, a few things are complicated. Most of the ancient historians were willing to exaggerate numbers and make relatively minor adjustments to the historical events they record. They don't mind saying that a slave sent a message in one place, and the master of that slave sent the same message in another, as their needs require. That isn't exactly what I mean by getting things wrong, though. Presumably, the author knew, or thought he knew, what actually happened there. The author just wrote the story in a way that was convenient to his point or audience. There are times that historians have actually gotten things wrong, though. The donation of Constantine is a well-known forgery, but it took centuries for it to be recognized as one. There were likewise many works written in the Middle Ages falsely attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. The Historia Augusta was respected for centuries before being exposed in the modern era. So it's possible that the ancients could fail to recognize a forgery. Some modern scholars have started to question the authenticity of some of Plato's dialogues. Their arguments aren't entirely baseless, though I and many others more practiced in this area aren't entirely convinced by them. Their arguments are similar to the arguments raised by those that think that Paul's letters include pseudepigrapha. While I'm not convinced by the arguments that Plato's corpus includes pseudepigrapha, my personal belief that the letters of Paul went through an editing process in Syriac makes the situation regarding Paul's letters much more complicated and difficult to sort out. I'd love to work on that book someday, but it will be much more complicated than my Masoretic Matthew, and I have much less idea where to start with that. That brings us around to this point, though. It's well within the realm of possibility that the generation of a forgery is wrong about the author of a document, and it's also possible for those receiving a forgery to be wrong about the date of composition by decades or even centuries. There are those that actually defend the traditional dates of the Gospels, and there are those that try to push the dates that the Gospels were written later. From where I sit, neither side is able to provide a bulletproof defense of their position. Part of that is that neither side is doing this the way that speaks to me. I prefer to see a comparison of like to like. Without some kind of calibration, a person can claim that evidence is good or bad based on their feelings. By comparing like to like, we can calibrate those feelings. If the warning signs that the Gospels are forgeries are the same as we see in the Historia Augusta or the donation of Constantine, that's a mark against them. If the evidence that they're reliable are the same as what we see in Tacitus and Herodotus, that's a mark in their favor. I would love to see someone make that kind of comparison. With that much said, there is one thing that the ancients never got wrong: the original language of a document. The ancients were sometimes wrong about the date the document was written. They were sometimes wrong about who wrote a document. But they never got the language wrong. The only document I'm aware that modern scholarship thinks the ancients got the original language of the document wrong is the Gospel of Matthew. That immediately inspired the question: if this is the only case that the ancients were wrong about the original language of a document, what makes us so sure that they were wrong in this case? This is what took me so long to fully write out these thoughts. It feels counterintuitive, but coming to the conclusion that it's possible that the ancients were wrong about the date and author of the Gospels ultimately led me to the conclusion that they were extremely unlikely to have gotten the original language of Matthew wrong. For the critic to convince me that this isn't the case, all they need to do is come up with another couple of examples of documents that the ancients were wrong about the original language. Show me that this is an error that the ancients made occasionally. As it stands, it looks to me like the ancients simply didn't make this particular error often enough to be detectable.